Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Jerusalem Day marked with riots and clashes as opposed to celebrations and parades. Meanwhile, the political change bloc reportedly closing in on a deal to form the next government. And finally, wounded IDF veterans are given the support they deserve. Well, it's Jerusalem Day, the anniversary of Israel's reunification of the Holy City after the War of 1967. But on the back of ongoing protests, riots, and clashes in Jerusalem, the mood in Israel's capital city is far from celebratory. Viewer discretion is advised. The following videos may be hard for many to watch. Jerusalem descending into a war zone, the likes of which has not been seen in the city in many, many years. Widespread violence between Palestinians and Israeli police continuing now, following nearly nightly clashes throughout the entire Muslim holy month of Ramadan, but seemingly coming to a head with Jerusalem Day celebrations set to start Monday afternoon. And among the deadliest encounters so far, a Palestinian lynch mob attacking an Israeli Jewish driver, causing him to lose control of the vehicle and ram into one of the rioters. The driver, Ro'i Mordechai, explaining that he was trying to escape the mobs as they reportedly sprayed him in the face with pepper spray and attempted to force him and his passenger out of the car while pelting the vehicle with stones and cinder blocks.
ירדנו ברחוב בן הדיה וברחוב פה של שער האריות, שני רחובות שאמורים להיות מאובטחים ומתואמים עם המשטרה. הרחובות ריקים עם משטרה ומלאים בצעירים ערבים. כל הדרך אנחנו חוטפים אבנים, ואני עוקף משמאל, עוקף בנתיב הנגדי, עובר את הצומת באדום, ממשיך לחטוף אבנים כל הדרך. אני יורד, אני משטרה על הקו, אני אומר להם, זורקים עליי אבנים, אני מתקדם לכיוון שער האריות. ממשיך, יש פה כוח משטרה למעלה בשער האריות, כוח משטרה 50 מטר פה למטה בצומת, אתם רואים את הניידות, הם היו פה כל הזמן, הם פה חוסמות את הכביש מהבוקר. אני מגיע לפה, כבר אין לי יותר את מי לעקוף, אין לי לאן להתקדם, אני פשוט מתחיל לעשות הלוך חזור במקום כמו פרופרה, השמשות מתנפצות, נכנסו עוד אבנים לרכב, גז פלפל נכנס לנו לתוך הרכב, עד שבשלב מסוים האוטו נעצר, אני נתקע פה בבטון, פותחים את הדלתות, ממשיכים להרביץ לנו, עשרות ערבים, רוצחים, חיות, נכנסים ופשוט מכים בנו עד שמגיע שוטר, ושוטר אחד מכל השוטרים שנמצאים פה למטה, שוטר בודד, מגיע ומסיים את האירוע.
Mordechai and his passenger then heading to hospital for treatment, while the Palestinian who was hit is in unknown condition, though in the video he's seen walking away from the crash. All in all, so far, over 300 Palestinians have been injured according to the Palestinian Red Crescent, and at least 7 Israeli civilians, Jewish and Arab, including a baby girl, have been hospitalized due to the violence, as well as at least 21 police officers. Israeli police doing everything they can on the ground to quash the escalations in Jerusalem, including using stun grenades, blockades, and water cannons in and around the Temple Mount complex, also known as the Haram al-Sharif Plaza outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Muslim worshippers, demonstrators, and rioters, for their part, throwing stones and fireworks at police while lighting fires, and even waving the green flags of the Hamas terror organization. And not just in Jerusalem either, clashes having spread overnight to Nazareth, Haifa, and Hebrew University in Jerusalem, among other places as well. Palestinian protesters in the capital today declaring a victory.
בימים האחרונים אנחנו היינו עדים להתפרעויות אלימות בירושלים בהשפעת גורמים מתסיסים. לא נאפשר לאף גורם קיצוני לערער את השקט בירושלים. נשליט בחוק וסדר, בתקיפות ובאחריות. נמשיך לשמור על חופש הפולחן לכל הדתות, אבל לא נאפשר הפרות סדר אלימות. באותה נשימה אני אומר לארגוני הטרור, ישראל תגיב בעוצמה על כל מעשה תוקפנות מרצועת עזה.
Meanwhile, all this just hours ahead of planned parades through the Old City as part of Jerusalem Day celebrations, honoring Israel's reunification of the city from Jordan in 1967. Police, government officials, and parade organizers ignoring security warnings to at least alter the routes this year so that they avoid Muslim areas of the city. The petitioners arguing that any demonstration through East Jerusalem, for one, would only serve to inflame tensions that only started to calm down in the early afternoon. In fact, to preemptively ease tensions, police already issued a ban on Jewish groups from even visiting the Temple Mount on Jerusalem Day, an act that itself received protest and condemnation by pro-Israeli Jewish groups.
Our own police, the Israeli police, has sadly denied us to go up there, and instead we go to the Western Wall, but that is not how we understand full redemption. We want to go up to our Temple Mount. We want equal rights there. The Israeli Supreme Court has decided that we have a right to pray there, we have a right to go there, and it's the heart of Judaism. And this moment is bittersweet. On the one hand, we celebrate Jerusalem Day. On the other hand, we realize that Jerusalem is not fully reunited, and we are denied rights, and instead the jihad rules this place. So we're going to continue to protest and to celebrate at the same time. That's Jerusalem Day 2021.
Again, though, these clashes coming not from nowhere, but from the growing animosity between Jews and Arabs in the city taking hold over the past few weeks. Tensions starting with the blockade around the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem during Ramadan, which was later removed, followed by a series of attacks against visibly Jewish Israelis posted to social media, and the planned eviction of several Palestinian families from the East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Furthermore, the violence being instigated and fanned by Palestinian extremist groups like Fatah's military wing and the Hamas terror group in Gaza, who are reportedly looking to cash in the violence for political points in the wake of canceled Palestinian elections. Now, while Israeli and international authorities call for calm, several in the international community are also heavily pressuring Israel with condemnations over the clashes. The UN Security Council calling for an emergency meeting, while Arab states like Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Sudan, Bahrain, and the UAE each call upon and dress down their respective Israeli ambassadors. And the United States likewise charging Israel with restoring calm on Jerusalem Day while ensuring religious plurality at all holy sites in Jerusalem. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for his part, however, defending Israel's position.
54 שנים שירושלים מאוחדת תחת שלטון מדינת ישראל הדמוקרטית. וכשאתה סורק אחורה אלפי שנים של שלטון יהודי, ואחר כך של שלטון זרים, והיום שוב שלטון של מדינת היהודים, רק תחת ריבונות ישראל הובטח חופש דת מלא ועקבי לכל הדתות.
Joining me now with more Middle East expert and lecturer at Bar-Ilan University, Mordechai Kedar, an expert on the Middle East and U.S.-Israel ties, former Israeli ambassador in the United States, Yoram Ettinger. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, I'll start with you, Yoram. How do you respond to the international criticisms against Israel, especially with respect to Jerusalem and religious plurality?
Well, it's a sad reality which is to be expected. The UN and Europe, much of the world, is yet to accept Israeli sovereignty in Western Jerusalem, let alone in reunited Jerusalem. The UN has been a top supporter of rogue regimes, of terror regimes, one-sided as far as Israel's conflict with its neighbors. But most importantly, when one hears criticism of Israel's war on terrorism in Jerusalem, when one hears the immoral moral equivalence, one should realize this is the most effective tailwind to more terrorism, to more violence. And certainly when there are calls for Israel to retreat and to concede, one should realize that Israeli concessions would serve as fuel, not water, to the burning Middle East. And the past has proven that Israel does have the capability to defy global pressure, US pressure, and in almost all those cases, in hindsight, it was Israel which was right and the critics were wrong.
Mordechai Kedar, your response?
Well, what you see today is the result of the Israeli weakness, which was demonstrated several times in the past. And just to remind you what happened with the metal detectors 3 years ago, when Israel was forced by the violence of the Muslims to remove those metal detectors after the assassination of 2 Israeli policemen on the Temple Mount. And 2 weeks ago, Israel surrendered and took out the metal barriers from the Damascus Gate. And today is the result of the weakness which Israel demonstrated. I think that Israel should have streamed to Jerusalem 2 or 3 brigades of the IDF and to flood Jerusalem, means East Jerusalem, with Israeli soldiers and policemen. Believe me, you wouldn't see these scenes.
But okay, wouldn't that just exacerbate things? I mean, because we're talking here about a supposed Palestinian response to Israeli force. So you're advocating increasing force.
When those thugs, when they see force, they retrieve. When they see weakness, it encourages them. Look, today there should have been the flag parade to commemorate the day of Jerusalem, the unification of Jerusalem. But lo and behold, in the morning, at 10 o'clock in the morning, the police decided to exclude the Temple Mount from this parade. 2 hours later, when the Muslims understood that Israel actually shows weakness by not allowing this parade to go to the Temple Mount, they started the riots of today.
Well,
This is how it works.
Well,
when Israel shows weakness, it encourages their violence. When Israel shows power, they are retrieving.
All right. So, similarly, many pressures against Israel reject Israeli construction and advancement in Jerusalem. Prime Minister Netanyahu basically ignoring these pressures, especially when it comes to the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Let's take a look at what Netanyahu had to say.
אנחנו גם מודפים בתוקף את הלחצים שלו לבנות בירושלים, ולצערי הלחצים הללו מתגברים בעת האחרונה. אני אומר גם לידידינו הטובים ביותר, ירושלים היא בירת ישראל, וכפי שכל עם בונה בבירתו ואת בירתו, גם לנו שמורה הזכות לבנות בירושלים ואת ירושלים. כך עשינו וכך נמשיך לעשות.
So, Ambassador Eggenger, I'll come back to you now. Going off of what Mordechai Kedar was saying about inflaming with Israel's weakness the violence, how do you view these comments from Netanyahu? Is he being too callous, or is he in the right direction?
Well, first of all, Palestinian violence has never been in response to Israeli aggression. Palestinian violence did not start with the reunification of Jerusalem. It did not start with Israel's returning to the mountain ridges of Judea and Samaria and the Golan Heights. Palestinian terrorism started back in the 1920s. The PLO, the largest Palestinian terror organization, headed today by Mahmoud Abbas, was established 3 years before the 1967 war. When it comes to Prime Minister Netanyahu's rhetoric in face of pressure, first of all, I wish that his talk would be matched by his walk when it comes to construction in Jerusalem. But most importantly, for those who utter criticism at Israel, they should realize Israel's defiance of terrorism serves the best of America's own interest, the best interest of the democratic world. Israel is the beachhead. Israel is the outpost of the free world here in the Middle East, and it is Israel which serves as a defense line of the free world. Israel's retreat in face of the current wave of terrorism would provide tailwind to Middle East terrorism to further their goals in Europe and all the way to the American continent.
Professor Mordechai Kedar, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, thank you again so much for being with us and for sharing with us your insights.
Thank you.
In related news, the violence in Jerusalem coming amidst renewed terror attacks in the south and in the West Bank. Palestinian militants in Gaza, for one, having launched at least 10 rockets towards Israeli civilians between Sunday night and Monday morning. Rocket alert sirens sounding across Sderot, Ashkelon, and other southern Israeli communities. The Iron Dome interceptor striking down one, while the other rockets fell into open areas, and this in addition to several explosive balloons landing in the south, including in the agricultural kibbutz Dorot. In fact, 6 fires have broken out just today due to the incendiary balloons. And the IDF overnight reportedly closing the Erez crossing between Israel and Gaza, except for humanitarian goods, as well as striking multiple Hamas military installations overnight in the Strip. Moving on now to political disagreements. The so-called Change bloc, currently led by Yair Lapid of Yesh Atid and the Yamina party's Naftali Bennett, hoping to finalize coalition agreements between 7 different parties within the next 2 days. The haste reportedly in response to Prime Minister Netanyahu's enticing of Yamina party members to object to the unity government and jump ship. But here to discuss, we welcome back political analyst Orly Rappaport. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so what are the chances that Lapid and Bennett are actually successful in the next 2 days especially?
I want to say that I'm very optimistic, but then I sound like I'm for one side and against the other. I think it's very realistic that they will form a government for many, many reasons that I don't know if you want me to say now.
Yeah.
Or,
Well, so hit me with a couple of reasons and also what this unity might look like.
So the first reason is that nobody wants to go to 5th elections right now. And so many people, let's put it this way, Bennett comes with some kind of ideology, but to begin with, he said that he's more interested, it's more important for him to have a government rather than go to another elections, because that's what he feels is important for the country. From the first time he spoke, I think, he said something in the lines of, we'll put ideology aside right now because we need to fix our country. He
Even
was
if
talking
it's unstable, though?
He was talking about the economy at the time. It was Corona when people were dying here. So things have a little bit changed since then. So his interest is to form a government. And plus, if he goes to another election, what's going to change? Nothing's going to change. We'll have a 5th one and a 6th one. Until they change the way that we do our elections here, it's going to stay the same right now, as long as Netanyahu is prime minister and heading the Likud party. The other side of this is all the Lo Netanyahu. We don't want Netanyahu.
Just not Netanyahu bloc,
yes,
yeah.
bloc, exactly. And for them, the only thing they've been speaking about for so long is just not Netanyahu. It's very easy for them, I think, to sell giving up the ideology, which is almost non-existent, if what they deliver is having Netanyahu leave Balfour. So they will be very, very flexible. And you see people from Meretz, even Meretz party, saying we will do whatever it takes to get Netanyahu out of Balfour. For them, that's the first promise they made to the voters, and that's the only promise they're interested in keeping. I mean, along the lines of not leaving too much of their ideology behind. I don't see them now, I don't know, sipuach, the word sipuach, in English, help me?
No,
okay.
that word.
Taking over, if to say so, Judea and Samaria. Not going to happen.
Annexation, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Annexation. Not going to happen on their watch, but on the other hand, keep in mind we have Biden as president in the United States. Yeah. It's not that we have much, in terms of right-wing moves or steps, not much is going to happen in the next 4 years.
Well, and it's funny because not much is going to happen because I think that there are too many ideologies in this type of unity bloc, going everywhere from left-wing Meretz and the Arab parties to the right-wing parties with Yamina and arguably even to the right of him. Mm-hmm. But something that you told me actually is that this is more or less what Bennett has been hoping for, with the exception of Meretz and the Arab parties.
Yes, Bennett has been hoping since 2013, I think, when he came into politics, the same time as Yair Lapid. They had the Brit Achim, it was called, and they went together to Netanyahu to have more power. So Bennett, to begin with, started with an ideology that is more connecting between the parts of Israel and trying to be more, again, lost the word, trying to be more diplomatic.
Yeah.
No, more diplomatic. Okay. Like right-wing opinions he has. No one's going to take that away from him, that he's very right-wing, both from like the side of economy and also how he sees Israel as a state and what should happen here. He is right-wing. but he's a little bit more flexible in terms of sitting with people. And not only that, Netanyahu, I think one of the biggest mistakes he made, he forgot at some point that also having some kind of correct work environment or some kind of
not micromanaging as Bibi is known to do.
And also the personal skills. If you're prime minister for so long and so many people can't stand you that come out of your own party, or any person who worked with him, basically, most people who worked with him don't want to see him, don't want to hear him. They hate him. It's a strong...
He still poses quite the threat, though. I mean, he's pulling people away from Yamina.
I don't know if he's pulling people away from Yamina. There's one person who left Yamina, as you know, Chaver Knesset Amichai Shikli.
Yeah.
Amichai Shikli, I think one of the reasons he was part of this list to begin with is to show that other than the economy and like other things that he has in his party, Amichai Shikli is a real ideologist, real right-wing ideologist.
Less pragmatic than Bennett in this case.
Less pragmatic than Bennett, and also he came from a different world. Like for him, ideology, he's never been a politician. And when you bring people who are such big ideologists, that's the price usually you pay. And I will not be surprised, by the way, that the one mandate out of the 7 that Bennett received, that Amichai Shikli represents, are the number of people who actually voted for Bennett for him to only sit with Netanyahu.
All right, well, we've got a lot of obstacles to overcome, many hurdles here. But hopefully in the next 2 days, we'll have an answer one way or the other.
Oh, we will.
Oli Rapoport, thank you so much for coming.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Now, despite the ongoing political issues, Israeli authorities apparently agreeing at least on something and finally doing right by the nation's wounded veterans. Following weeks of demonstrations and negotiations, Israeli politicians approving of reforms to the country's treatment and rehabilitation programs for wounded military veterans. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gantz, and a number of other top officials announcing the One Soul outline on Monday.
מדינת ישראל הייתה ידועה במשך שנים בצדק כמדינה ששומרת ודואגת לחייליה ששירתו אותה בהגנה על ביטחונה ונפגעו במהלך השירות הזה, אם בקרבות או במהלך שירותם. אבל מנגד אי אפשר להכחיש שבמהלך השנים חלה התרופפות מסוימת, כפי שקורה בכל ממסד בירוקרטי, ויש צורך לרענן את המחויבות הזאת שלנו גם ברפורמות וגם בתקציבים. כפי שהבטחנו, נעביר כבר בשנה הנוכחית סכום של כ-300 מיליון שקל לאגף, תקציב שייכנס לבסיס תקציב המדינה. אני מבקש להודות לשרי הביטחון והאוצר, לארגון נכי צה"ל ולמנכ"ל משרדי שהביאו לסיכום המתווה. באמת הגיע הזמן.
Now, under the One Soul project, the 300 million shekels, approximately $92 million US, will go directly towards care and rehab of IDF veterans with an emphasis on treating PTSD. Simultaneously, Defense Minister Benny Gantz will be responsible for promoting amendments that would continue implementations of reforms across unresolved fields, as well as further aiding disabled veterans. And to that end, Gantz outlining his primary focus.
הדבר הזה בעיניי מאוד מאוד חשוב. אולי יש דבר אחד חשוב מכל, זה ההכרה בלוחמינו, ושהם לא יצטרכו להוכיח דבר וחצי דבר. לא משנה לי, כשלוחם גולני או חיל אחר נכנס לקרב, לסג'איה, לא מעניין אותי איזה תקדימים היו לו בבית לפני כן. ברגע שהוא נכנס לתוך הקרב הזה, הוא ייצג את מדינת ישראל, ואם הוא נפצע בו, מבחינתי זאת נקודת האפס, שממנה מתחילים להסתכל על הדברים, גם פיזית, וגם נפשית, ואנחנו נקפיד שכך יהיה ונתאים את כל המדיניות לעניין הזה.
Then Gantz adding how in the next few months more meetings will be held in order to best decide how and where to move forwards, while calling for thoughts and prayers on behalf of Itzik Saidyan. The 26-year-old Saidyan, who suffers from post-traumatic stress, sparked the most recent national interest and demonstrations over this long, drawn-out crisis when he protested against the IDF's rehab services treatment by lighting himself on fire. He's still in hospital, suffering from his wounds, and fighting for his life. And all right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.25 shekels to the American dollar and 2.68 shekels to the Canadian dollar. Finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.